Hi there, and welcome to our TES Big Debate webinar. My name is Dan Worth, I'm Senior Editor for TES Magazine, and I'll be hosting our discussion today. This special edition of the series is part of Safeguarding Awareness Week, our annual week dedicated to raising the awareness of and sharing best practice in all areas of safeguarding. No surprises then that this discussion will be all about safeguarding, and we'll use the results of a recent survey of almost 700 educators across the UK to inform our discussion. Joining me for the conversation today, sharing their expertise and advice, are three experts in the safeguarding area. I'm delighted to welcome Sue Bailey, Safeguarding Lead at the Arthur Terry Learning Partnership, Katherine Tyler, Group Safeguarding and Chief Welfare Officer at Globeducate, who will bring an international perspective to all things safeguarding, and Luke Ramsden, the Director of Safeguarding at St Benedict School and former Chair of the Safeguarding Advisory Board, the Safeguarding Company. Now, as mentioned, today's discussion has been built around results from our recent safeguarding survey of just under 700 educators across the UK, and we'll be using those statistics to inform our conversation as we go. So to kick off our discussion, I'm going to focus on the first stat that 85% of respondents reported seeing an increase in safeguarding issues compared to 5 years ago, and 59% reported an increase compared to last year. So obviously that's a big rise, lots of reasons that might be driving that. Sue, I'm going to come to you first. Just give us a little bit of context about your role. And then what do you think? Are you seeing those kind of stats? That big increase in 5 years and even 1 year? What do you think is driving that? It's a big topic to unpick, but let's just start with that stat. What do you think about all that?
Yes, okay, thank you. So I'm Sue Bailey. I'm a safeguarding lead across 22 schools now in a multi-academy trust. So schools we've got little ones, big ones, schools in the city, schools in the country. So a real variety. If I'm honest, I'm not surprised at those statistics. And I think we can attribute them to a number of things. So obviously we're still seeing very much the impacts of lockdown. We're also seeing the impact of children being online much more, that phrase we used during lockdown where children were online much more, not supervised. So we're seeing that. We've got mental health issues that are also triggering a lot of safeguarding concerns. And we've also got, and I think we're particularly seeing this now, the impact of the economic downturn, the impact of poverty, more children living in disadvantage. The other side of the coin, and I think there is one, is that across the education setting, our focus on safeguarding awareness has been much greater. So we've certainly done much more training than we've ever done and raised awareness with all of our colleagues in terms of what to look for, indicators of abuse, how to report, and what they should be doing. So their responsibilities, everyone's responsibilities in terms of safeguarding.
Yes, that's a good point on that second point. And that's actually a statistic that comes up as well, is that 15% of respondents and designated safeguarding leads said that they think some of that rise might be because of an increased awareness. So in a way, it might be a good thing that we're seeing more reports come in because people are more aware of what is the report and how to do it. But obviously, there's a line, isn't there, between yes, that's good, but also a concern maybe. But Luke, coming to you, same sort of thing really. Again, are you seeing that rise? Does it surprise you, the scale of it? And again, tell us a little bit just briefly about your role to contextualize your response to this.
Yeah, so I'm a deputy head of a senior school in West London and also the safeguarding lead of a group of schools around that senior school. Sue obviously makes lots of great points there. The one that I want to pick up on, I think, is that I think my concern is how we use these statistics, because I think it's very easy for us to go, oh my goodness, this is a really big increase. And for a senior team in a school to go, right, well, what's the obvious thing we want to do? We want to lower those numbers. And so my worry is that it's how we use those numbers is what I think is that the sort of indicative thing of this is telling us what we should be doing in schools. What it is doing, I think, is flagging up, this is where we need to be putting our investment, this is where we need to be putting our energies as a school. My slight concern is that it's very easy to go, we have a high number, let's now as a school try and see if we can lower that number. And if you like, work towards having fewer concerns. And that rather than taking it as this is actually a good news story in the sense of we are flagging things up, we are as staff ever more aware and vigilant of what's happening, and that therefore we know where to put our resources and our efforts, and not to go, well, this disaster of lots and lots of concerns. Let us as a school try and make sure, let's get down to 60% by next year. Because of course the instant thing, it's that working to a figure is for a teacher to go, well, I'll get rewarded if I don't particularly pass on these concerns, if I try and deal with it off grid, if you like. So I'd say that's I think statistics like this, it's all about how they're used rather than the numbers per se.
Yes, absolutely, and it is complex, isn't it? As you said, and I think Sue was sort of moving towards saying as well is that it's a hard one to get right, isn't it? Because like you say, you don't want it to come down if that means people aren't reporting or cases aren't being passed on. But of course, numbers going up sounds, as you say, your first reaction is, oh, that's shocking, but maybe it is a good thing, and it's very complicated trying to unpick that. And Katherine, that's perfect to bring you in. Already we're getting into sort of pretty deep areas here, but you're in an international school group, so you'll have a very different perspective in some ways. But obviously, children and the concerns and the need to keep them safe is a universal thing. So are you seeing, are you sort of agree with Luke and Sue there that maybe a rise can be a good thing, or are you aware of trends, maybe like the online, that are actually increasing issues that mean you have to do more work in this area?
Yes, so just to say that I'm the Safeguarding and Welfare Officer for a group of international schools. So we have about 40,000 students across the world, in 65 schools, in right across the world, in Africa, North Africa, Europe, largely Europe, Canada, and India as well. So yes, I agree with a lot of what Sue was saying, in terms of the trends, certainly mental health, online safety, all that is obviously very interlinked because, when children are accessing certain material and social media, etc., that can impact their mental health, and so on. To answer your question, and also to pick up on what Luke was saying, when we look at our data, we class our concerns level 1, level 2, level 3 across the group. So we have thresholds document that all the schools use. And we've noticed a steep increase actually in level 1 concerns, which, like Luke was saying, we've actually put down as a positive thing, because that's showing that staff are really getting that message to report niggling doubts, these low-level concerns. But we have also noticed that our level 2 and level 3 have actually remained fairly stable. So we're reading into that a good news story, which is that we're picking up on these level 1 concerns and we're stopping them becoming level 2 and level 3 concerns. So and it's passing that message on that yes, it's a good news story, in a way that they're not escalating.
Yes. Can you touch on what a level 1 concern type thing is, but just broadly?
So that would equate to, I've used sort of the thresholds for local authority. So that would equate to sort of an early help referral potentially, or it could be anything basically that doesn't reach the threshold whereby you would be contacting external services. So it's quite a broad range, and we do obviously very much encourage staff to put any, and as I'm sure in all schools who have a strong safeguarding culture, it's just, if you're even slightly concerned, just put it on there. Don't worry, over-report, don't under-report. So it's a wide range of concerns. A level 1 concern, it's basically anything that a staff member feels needs reporting, and then it's up to the DSL to then triage that concern and decide, okay, what level actually is that?
Yes, I see. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and that leads us nicely on actually to the next sort of area of the report I'm gonna talk about, which is that we asked people about this, and 34% said they're seeing a new safeguarding issue reported on a weekly basis, which sort of plays into some of this. But then 10% said they only see a new issue every 6 months, and so I wondered. I mean, in a way, Luke, I'm going to come to you next for that one. Then, what this kind of goes to your kind of what you were talking about at the start there, but do you think the fact that 34% seeing a new issue every week sounds potentially bad, but actually links into this idea that there is better reporting and people are more aware of what needs to be passed down the line?
Yeah, I think that is the biggest trend. I think, in a sense, it's kind of looking at that distinction between safeguarding per se. So I mean, this is a big sort of claim, but I don't think there's been any massive uptick in a really significant safeguarding concerns around schools. What I do, and I think the fact that we are noting things sooner is a really good thing. I think it's more looking to that broader well-being thing, in that I think what is happening is that, if you like, issues of low-level anxiety, low-level difficulties of attendance, low levels of worries about what's happening in the family at home, those sort of things. I think that is if there is a big trend in terms of student behaviour and student concerns, that's the thing that we're seeing a lot of. And so exactly as Catherine's saying, I think that idea of, I think again, it will change upon how schools are sort of categorizing things. But I think the broad trend is of these people who are at low level attendance. They're not going to need to be referred to CAMS necessarily. They're not necessarily got really significant issues, but it could be somebody who's has a long-standing anxiety and depression, or parents have long-standing concerns. And I think that's where I think the real challenge for schools come, is this much bigger mass of just, if I level one, to use Catherine's concerns, and exactly how we deal with all of that. And I think that's the big challenge, because it's that pressure of, you can say to teachers, of course you need to deal with all these things, but if you're a form tutor and you've say got 6 of these issues in a couple of weeks, where do you find the time for that? How do you fit that in with your academic schedule, with all these other things? That I think is the biggest challenge that I think that the survey as a whole throws up. That sense of a very big mess of lowish level concerns that is being sort of coming onto schools' plates. And I think, and legislation is always saying evermore it's the school's remit to deal with that. Pretty much every year, school now deals with that and that and that. So also we've got more on our plates every year as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. The workload issue is a big thing, and like goes safeguarding into other areas too. So again, from your perspective, then there's quite a few points there, but I suppose the fact that a regular increase per week can have a good thing. Conversely, only seeing 10% every 6 months from some schools is because of concern, really, wouldn't it? That not enough's getting passed through. And I suppose again, from your perspective on that staff workload thing, I mean, can you talk a little bit at all about how you work to try and make sure staff have the capacity to understand what they need to do in this and actually be able to do it?
Yeah, I think across our trust we've seen a huge increase now in us appointing people whose sole responsibility is safeguarding, so non-teaching members of staff. And I think that almost has to be the way forward. So people who can deliver early help plans, people who are available all of the time, so that it's not a case of, well, I've got my maths lesson this afternoon, I can't deal with that till after it. There's always somebody available and always somebody with the capacity to do that. And I think, again, that's contributed to the increase that we've seen in that staff have felt more confident in going to talk to that person because they know they've got the capacity and the time to deal with their concerns. And Dan, as you've just indicated, I would be really worried about situations where new concerns were only recorded, once every half term, or that 10% you've referred to, and I would be questioning there the training and the confidence of staff. How vigilant are they, and do they really know what to look for? So it is a complex situation, but I do think that we are making inroads across the education setting into managing that, because it's huge for teachers.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it does seem like a concerning statistic, that one. And Katherine, I'm going to come to you to sort of obviously offer your views on that as well. But one thing I'm going to add, and this maybe links to some of this, is that as part of this section of the survey, 90% of respondents said students often report safeguarding concerns directly to staff, and then 28% said they also use online systems. It was a multiple choice answer. It's not that our maths is way out there. And I just wondered, do you have in your school, in your group, do you have sort of multiple routes for people to report things? Because I think as well that presumably would make it better, because there's multiple touch points to get a concern raised. Whereas if you only have one channel maybe, and someone doesn't know it's there, isn't confident talking to someone face to face, whatever it might be, multiple channels is better.
Yes, absolutely. And that's obviously done very much on an individual school level. So in terms of students reporting concerns, that would be something that I promote across with all the DSLs, that it's really important to have multiple channels for students to report. However, it does seem to be, and I'm not at all surprised to hear that the majority of students do consider talking to a trusted adult to be the most, reliable and the most common, most popular way of reporting. And, for that reason, it's so important that we keep plugging the message that safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. And like Sue was saying, staff feel confident to receive disclosure. They're trained. They know the reporting routes, what to do once a student reports to them. And, of course, that schools are proactive in checking in with students as well, and staff know how to do that, because, looking at this data, students mostly want to talk to a trusted adult. And as I say, that's not to say that it's not important for there to be multiple ways, because there'll always be a couple of students who maybe don't want to do that, and it's just as important that we hear their voice as well. But this brings me to something that I talk a lot to my DSLs about, is that it's so important that students know when they speak to an adult that they won't be judged. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I know we're going to be talking about online issues a little bit later on. But this shame that students can feel, if they let, for example, share an image online, and just how absolutely crucial it is they know that they will not be judged. And this is such an important message for parents as well, that we need to educate parents on. But I'm moving ahead of myself a little bit there, but yeah.
yes. The online issues are big, and we'll come to those.
Yes.
Just quickly though, I'll ask Sue and Luke for their quick input on terms of those channels for reporting. I mean, can you talk a little bit about what you offer? Again, don't go into great detail, but more just that, just sort of touch point on it. And again, like, I presume that's something you'd agree is important. So there is that, concerns can be surfaced in a variety of ways. Luke, I'll come to you first.
I mean, I've been struck by how much we've got a reporting app in our school, how much it's become really normalized. Of absolutely, the end point is that conversation with the human being. But actually, our students have got quite into this idea of firing off, because they can do it at any time of day or night. It gets answered the next day. But I think you can see those times where, quite late in the evening, they might just say, you know what, I do want to talk to someone. They've plucked up the courage to say that thing, and it's away from other people, and it's sort of using a way of communicating that they're very familiar with. So I think these reporting apps can be really, really helpful, because it's a slight cliche to say it's kind of using their own systems to support them, but it kind of is. They're on their phones all the time, so to have a positive thing on there is great. So I've personally found this last year a real increase in use of technology to allow us to engage and to make that first step, if you like. So that's been real positive.
Yeah, that's very interesting, doesn't it? And actually links maybe to why we've seen those sort of numbers come up. One school against the survey, but it sort of links to that, doesn't it? Maybe. And Sue, same quick question to you.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Luke, and we've got reporting apps in some of our schools. But where it's proving most useful is for those children we don't see all the time. So children who've got long-term absence, children who are working from home. It gives us a really important link to enable us to maintain that contact with them. So yes, it's a good thing. Again, it opens that channel then to go and talk to that trusted adult.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's really interesting, and it's sort of hopefully useful for other schools to hear about the benefit that can come when you do broaden out your routes for reporting. So Katherine, you've already nicely sort of set us up to talk about the online with your reference earlier, and obviously this is going to be a big discussion point. So I'm going to set out the scene with a few stats from our survey. So it's actually interesting to note that only 8% of respondents said safeguarding concerns were originating in school, and that links to another nice point in the survey, which was 92% of respondents said they felt their school was a safe environment for pupils. But obviously that means the majority of the concerns are coming from outside school, and 64% of those were definitively outside school. We'll come to that. But 24% were coming from the online world, which is everything from bullying and cyberbullying, nudes and sexting, even reports of online predators approaching children, quite worrying stuff. And then overall, 93% of respondents said safeguarding is becoming harder as children become more autonomous online. And there was a survey report last week from Ofcom saying children, it's like 7 to 9, a quarter of them had smartphones and using social media. So, really big stuff. The online world has always been a big concern, but it seems like it is growing maybe. Again, I'm aware it's a big topic, but Sue, let's come back to you. On the online, concerns around safeguarding, what are you seeing? What are you doing around education of pupils and parents, I guess? It's a big topic, I know, but give us your insights as best you can.
So we've just rolled out a new strategy across all of our schools. So we've got 10,500 students, so they've all been given an iPad, which is fantastic in terms of their learning, but of course it's created some issues in terms of what they access. So we have seen an increase in children trying to research things or looking at things that you wouldn't want. So that online safety for us has been really, really important. So we've done an awful lot within our curriculum. You teach your children how to stay safe online. We've also done a lot with our parent body and our staff body. So we monitor that really carefully through an online monitoring system. And actually what's interesting, and it links with the previous point, some children are now using that system as a cry for help, because they know if they write something on their laptop, it will flag up our system and then somebody will go and talk to them. So we are seeing a big increase, but it's linked to a variety of things. First of all, our iPads, but also, as we've said, far more children are having access to all forms of technology. And yes, we need to think very carefully how we teach them and their parents to keep them safe online.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I suppose, like I say, the iPad rollout is something that is quite sort of common now, isn't it? It does come with these new hurdles and headaches, but obviously, worth it. Can you touch on briefly at all with parents as well? Is it something you engage parents on quite proactively?
We've tried really hard to do that, and our digital strategy lead has done an awful lot of parent workshops. We also use, or we promote an online company that issue updates, online safety webinars and all sorts to parents. So we try and engage them with that as well, because we know that we've got a group of parents, as we all have, who wouldn't come into school for that type of meeting, but are quite happy to engage online with other people. So making them more aware of what the device is capable of, and also what our monitoring and filtering systems are, so they know that what we do, and then they're aware of what their responsibilities are as well.
Yeah, excellent. That's really interesting. And
as an aside to that, we've now, and Luke touched on it just, we've looked at our holiday cover. So we were very much aware that these issues don't go away in the holidays. So for the first time since Christmas, really, we've actually employed DSLs to monitor those alerts over the holiday period to make sure that our children are as safe as they can be, but also that some of our DSLs get that well-earned break that they need.
right, that's very interesting. Yes, maybe that's something we could delve into more detail about how that works. But that's a really interesting development. Yeah, and Luke, obviously you sort of mentioned a couple of times there, so I'll come to you next. It seems natural. Again, online safeguarding and online concerns, something I think you've written about for TES before. Again, it's a big topic, but tell us, what's your view on this? What are you doing around education? Does things like that Ofcom report about a number of young people having smartphones concern you? Should schools be doing good work on trying to educate parents around why, the dangers that exist?
I think for me the key thing is education. I get very worried about just talking about banning, locking away, removing, getting rid of them, because that's just not going to happen. It's a bit like having a knife amnesty. The nice child who's probably not using their phone badly anyway will hand theirs in or whatever, and then the person who's kind of not using it well, or parents who aren't very interested, they'll buy their kid the phone anyway and just give it to them. And so I think that's not going to work. It's got to be about education, and also I see endlessly the children in my school using phones and technology brilliantly, intelligently and creatively, and writing stories online and creating interesting videos and doing all sorts of really positive things. So I just sort of putting a plug in there for, while safeguarding is important, I think just hammering it all and saying it's all bad is a really not a good plan. And so it's really about education, and there are all sorts of really good technological solutions out there that are already there. So if parents use the Google Family app, or all of the different smartphone things where you can control screen time, you can control what things they're looking at. We've got to, rather like Sue, all of our year 7 and 8s have now got school laptops, and they have got school filtering and monitoring systems on them. So they're on all the time. So we're able to, even when they're at home, have a bit of an oversight over if they're looking up inappropriate things. We've got somebody who takes charge of that to help the parents. So that sense that we're working in partnership. Again, we do online workshops for our parents to help them with supporting their children. But I think, yes, that sort of sense of education, how you can use it positively, supporting children. And we've just done a survey of our own students about use of phones. And I know they would say this, but most of our children aren't very concerned about online issues. And it was an anonymous survey. They could say exactly what they wanted. And, I think they probably underplayed the problems because they're teenagers and that's the kind of thing they do. But it's striking for me that young people don't feel in the same way there's a really massive problem all the time. And I think if we as grown-ups say there's a huge problem and they don't agree with us, that disconnect is going to be a big problem, because then we just seem like draconian people who are taking away something which is a fundamental part of their lives for, in their minds, no particularly good reason.
That's interesting though. How do you then address that though with education of the pupils? Because I think what you said, that you summed it up perfectly, and that they're probably slightly unaware maybe of the dangers, and of course they're savvy. Let's not pretend they don't know what they're doing to a large degree. But sometimes as adults we do know a bit more. We've got a bit more experience, how you want to term it. How can you walk that line better? Because as you say, you can't just be the kind of draconian, saying you can't do it and not explaining why. So how do you try and approach that?
It's that getting alongside them rather than lecturing them. It's having it's PSHE lessons where you discuss with them, how as you a year, how do you as a year group deal with these issues? It's about having lessons where you're talking about the law and consequences, not preaching at them saying, that is a bad thing to do. And I think, and also I think go back to the idea of parental controls of things, where you're saying you have your phone. It's a really good thing to have. What I as a parent am going to do is say you can have 2 hours each day. And I, as a parent, am going to make that decision. And I think it's that, so rather than saying your smartphone is gone, I don't trust you to ever use one, it's saying, I think 2 hours is about enough. And of course, they'll grumble about that. But I think it's that measured response and measured education.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, yeah, thank you for that. And Katherine, coming back to you, obviously you started the online reference earlier, but you'll obviously be seeing the same things, but obviously on an international scale. And I'm guessing as well that comes with lots of different cultural considerations and family ways of managing this. I mean, again, I know it's a big topic, but give us as much insight as you can on how you approach that in terms of education, in terms of dealing with parents, and even I guess the teachers having to adapt to the different sort of cultures in their school and their classrooms.
Well, yeah, I think I agree very much with Luke in that it's all about listening to children and starting conversations about what they enjoy online, starting with that positive, hearing about how they use online, what do they love, what are their worries, and being sensitive as well to your parental demographic. So what will appeal to different parent groups. So, for example, if your parents are largely they're working parents, then probably an online safety session in the middle of the day isn't going to be very useful to them. So think about alternatives. We've had a lot of success in some schools with online sessions. Rather, you can also record them, make sure they're available in lots of different ways. Also, it's sharing. We're really lucky in Globeducate to have a head of AI. So a colleague of mine who works very closely with schools. She goes around schools talking to students and parents. But she and I work together on guidance for schools and parents around dealing with online safety issues. So it's about finding those resources that are not just UK based. So for example, the Better Internet for Kids, there's lots of European or global resources out there. So it's finding obviously stuff that also will be in community languages, but of course we can use AI to help us there, because there's some amazing apps now where you can make the translation is incredible. So it's also making sure we harness technology to work for us as well, and not just being scared of it.
Yeah, I mean AI. I mean that's another huge.
Yeah, and that's a whole. Yeah, that's a whole. Exactly.
Image generation.
And just to carry on saying what I was saying before about helping parents as well know how to start conversations with children. So there's some great resources out there. ChildNet have a great resource which is helping parents how to start those conversations. And I think it's easy as educators, because we're so used to working with young people, that we know how to engage, or hopefully we know how to engage our young people in conversations. But parents might not be so confident, and recognizing that being a parent is a tough job, and some people need some help with it, and not judging our parents for finding it difficult, and walking alongside our parents as well as the students.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the smartphone era is a new one, right? Most people didn't have, I didn't grow up with a smartphone, but now I one day will have to parent my child around how to use a smartphone. And it's, well, thankfully, it won't be a blank canvas by then. But, for this generation, it's a real new frontier, right? So it is difficult. So that's great. I mean, I think we've really touched on the online world there. And I think that I meant to say, when you're all saying something, each of you was nodding along in agreement. So I think there was a good sort of consensus there of this kind of nice trying to get that sweet spot between education and not banning, but reaching points of sort of sensible use, which I think is good. And it shows that, hopefully people listening might either make them think that's what we do, great, or actually thinking maybe we need to sort of slightly adjust, maybe we're being a bit too draconian or whatever it is about how we're looking at mobile phones. But it's a big topic for sure. And actually, though, one thing it did make me want to ask about is that while we said 24% of concerns are coming from online, it actually meant 64% were starting outside school, presumably in a sort of non-online, in i.e. the real world, which actually is the majority, right? And so that makes you think that it's very easy, isn't it, to get drawn down the kind of the online concerns and fears, and they exist, of course. But actually, it sounds in a way like the biggest concerns are going to be the same things that have always existed around things like neglect, abuse, teachers spotting a concern with the pupil, or people coming to them with something that's going on in their life at home or in their home circumstances. So I suppose it seems like a good sort of reminder just to say that's really got to be a focus, and you must remember that and not get too distracted. Maybe not the right word, but about the online world. I mean, Luke, I'll come back to you on that just quickly. What do you think about that? That importance of the real kind of, you have to think about everything here when you're talking about safeguarding.
Absolutely, and I think the phrase that I'm constantly using with my staff is that one from KCSO, which is professional curiosity. I think it's one of the hardest things to get right as a teacher, particularly if you're not a specialist in safeguarding. That sense of somebody comes in with that a bruise on their leg or something, just what do you ask about it? Or they come in and they've got a brand new phone, brand new bag, and you're thinking you've never had that much money before. And so it's giving teachers the training and confidence to be able to be effectively curious about what's happening, so that absolutely we can address issues. I don't know, things like house parties, things like what's happening outside there, all sorts of things like that that come into the school community. And I think it then takes us right back to the idea of, I think it's absolutely essential that safeguarding leads, when they're talking to their senior teams, whether they're talking about how we're allocating our resources, I think it's really vital to say that schools, whether you agree with it or not, have a bigger and bigger issue every year, simply because we are dealing with this, and we've talked a bit about referral onwards. I'm sure the others will agree with me, that referral on path becomes ever and ever harder and steeper. Most things, and having already said a lot of the issues we're dealing with are lower level things, most things stay with us and stay with schools. And so we have to be putting ever more resources into working with families, working with children about things which are pretty much nothing to do with what's happening in school. We are doing a lot of the work that, say, 10, 20 years ago, social services, the police, all sorts of other organisations would be dealing with, and will be pushed straight back to us. So I think exactly right to emphasise the kind of real and in-person social issues and safeguarding. But I think that really re-emphasised that sense of we have a bigger and bigger challenge in resourcing and dealing with these issues as schools.
Yes, I mean, we wrote a piece recently on TED about the sort of decline in certain pupils not having social workers, and head teachers saying we would have expected that pupil to have had a social worker 5 years ago. Now we know there's a problem, and yet we can't get any external support. I mean, so again, from your point of view, do you sort of see that, or more generally to the original question around the importance of, I guess, things like professional curiosity and teachers being aware that things happen outside school is the biggest source of concerns, really?
Absolutely. And I think it would be interesting to unpick those statistics, because I'm still convinced that although we've only said a smaller proportion happens online, I think a lot of the things that happen in the community begin online, or we've got an online involvement. And I'm thinking in particular of the moment of a child who's been exploited, involved in gangs or whatever, but that actually began online, although it's very much live and real in the community. So I think we do need to be cautious there. But yes, I would agree with Luke, and I would agree with what you said about children that, even 10 years ago, I would have been convinced would have met the threshold, would have had a social worker, family support worker, somebody external to school to support them. And now that's not the case. It's very much back to school, early help plan, see what you can do first.
Yes, and your point there about the online world, offline world blurring is a really good one, isn't it? Because you're right, like in a way, the modern world, they are the same almost, and things happen while they move from here and they come back, and why make them different, right? It's all part of the same thing, but obviously there is that demarcation sometimes. But yes, very interesting point, and it, not good, it's bad to hear that you're seeing the same thing, but it underlines the trend, doesn't it, of this social worker issue. And Katherine, same thing to you again. I think internationally you must deal with this, but also again that cultural context, and like Luke was talking about professional curiosity, and how some parents bring their children up, how some cultures expect parents to treat children or whatever, that must make it even harder again for some of your staff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it's just being really clear about what the school values are. And then when students and parents are in school, that you abide by those. Well, first of all, that there is a very clear set of school values, and that those are ideally co-created with students and parents, and then certainly that everyone's on board with those. And so, no matter what happens outside the school, that everyone abides by those, is expected to abide by those values, those co-created values within the school setting. And just to go back a little bit to that question about the early help. So, now, of course, which is obviously a UK centric thing, but, now DSLs can be made a lead practitioner. That's a change that's come with working together, the new guidelines. So that really just doesn't it, just underlines just what we've been saying, that yes, actually it's actually written in black and white. How much that will actually happen, I don't know, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that. But yes, just to move back to the sort of international setting, and of course, the big challenge for us as DSLs in international schools, not in the UK, is finding out, okay, what are the children's services, what are the procedures. I've now got regional DSLs in most countries, so that's really helpful. So that's pulling together local knowledge and making sure that's disseminated. So obviously some DSLs will be from that country, but you may very well have a DSL who's not from that country. So it's making sure we've got really robust ways of sharing country-specific information across those countries, which we now have with the regional DSL role. But yes, it's challenging because different countries have different guidelines. But I was just at a conference earlier today, actually, and somebody was talking about looking at safeguarding through a rights-based lens. So really, really bringing everything back to rights. So of course, that's not to say you would ignore the country-specific rules, obviously, and laws, but that, it's really simplifying everything down to children's rights to be heard, rights to be kept safe, and so on. And I think that's just an aside, really, but just a very a nice, interesting way of looking at safeguarding in a global setting. Getting that, yeah.
Yes, no, and absolutely, and I think the point about the different laws and jurisdictions is even more complicated, and how you approach that. So very interesting area, and obviously in some ways not something that our state schools have to worry about, but it shows the sort of safeguarding is this universal thing and has its challenges wherever you are and so forth. I'm conscious of the time, and Luke, I know you've got to leave at some point to go and do an assembly, so busy as everyone here is on the call is. But last bit I'm going to touch on, and I'll come to you first so you can get an answer, and hopefully is. We looked at outcomes from cases, which we talked a lot here, haven't we, about reporting, but then actually about dealing with it, and then there being a sort of hopefully a positive resolution. And 44% of respondents said they felt there was always a positive outcome, which is a good sign. But then 54% said they felt there was only sometimes positive, and 2% said they were rarely or never positive. So obviously 2%, small amount, but we're hopefully that, still a bit of a worrying figure. But I just wondered, from your point of view, how do you sort of set in motion processes that mean you can try and deal with things adequately? If there is an outcome, does the staff member who reported it first, do you keep them updated where you can, so they feel like, yes, you saying that had an impact, that kind of thing? Again, conscious of the time, if you can give us an answer before we have to shoot off, that would be great.
Very good point. And that in terms of our staff, absolutely, that sort of trying to keep them aware and in the loop. So use of technology there is really important. So if a staff raises a concern, if all of the things that you do are typed up on that concern, that thread stays with that staff. So as with a lot of these things, intelligent use of technology can help get that right. The other thing that I found in terms of making sure that people feel the right things are happening, it's both for staff and students, if you like, doing really quite, for what safeguarding need might seem quite basic training of, well, this is where this all goes. So I think for a lot of people, it just goes behind the magic door of safeguarding and it's lost. You're never to be seen again. And you might hear some rumor about, some kid, doesn't get seen again in school or whatever. So I think even just explaining to staff and students, which we do as part of our PSHE and INSET at my school, saying this is what happens to these things. These are the processes we go through. And here's why you might not hear back about the details. And actually, we've found, because we do an annual survey about these issues with our students, we found that our students are much more comfortable and secure in what we're doing, simply because we've given them that broad top line of here's how it works. Here's why you don't hear about these sort of things. And that means that at least they've had that explained to them. And I think that's a really important message, which I'm often giving to safeguarding needs, is saying, be as clear as you can with what's happening, even if not with specific details. This is how it's going to be done. These are the rules of engagement, if you like, on safeguarding. So at least they kind of have that understanding of that's what you do as a school, and you're comfortable and confident in how that works.
Yes, that's an excellent point, is it? People like to be informed, and like say, if something just disappears off, you never hear anything. You wonder, was it worth doing, and so forth. So that's very interesting. And as I say, if you need to leave the webinar, then
I will in fact go and do my assembly. So
go do it. Yeah, thank you very much for your input for the webinar, though. Thank you. Sue, I'll come to you for that same thing though, about that process and seeing it through to the end and making sure that there's sort of insight as much as you can provide, whether that's to staff or pupils. Again, how do you manage that and make sure there is that sense of like, this is why it's worth you sending those reports on?
Very similar to Luke, really, and it's about that need to know. But also, what was quite interesting, we did a survey of our staff a little while ago, and they wanted more information about what a Section 17 or a Section 47 assessment and inquiry meant, because we've often used those terms, but they didn't really understand them. I think sometimes, sadly, though, in terms of outcomes, we aren't able to guarantee that positive outcome. And sometimes we have to say we've done the right thing as a school, that we've now passed that child, that family onto other services. And it's an understanding that we can't fix everything in school. And we often say, when a child's made a disclosure, sometimes it's going to get an awful lot worse before we see things getting better. So again, it's about that need to know. It's about explanation, keeping people updated as much as we can, but still retaining that confidentiality where needed.
Yes, you make a good point there, and it's good to remember that there isn't always going to be a positive outcome, and sometimes there will be sort of a long process. But I suppose, as you say, as long as you can keep staff aware of the school is doing the right thing, that's all you can do sometimes, and that's the challenge with this area, isn't it? Is that you are going to deal with difficult situations. Katherine, same to you, I suppose, in that sense of keeping people informed of the process and making sure that the outcomes are as positive as can be. In positive meaning, I suppose, follow the process as much as actually positive in terms of resolution.
So we use safeguarding software where the person that puts the concern down has access to that concern, and then then those concerns are filed when we consider them in monitoring phase, because nothing's ever really finished, is it? You never stop monitoring, but it's having faith. It's the staff member having confidence in the safeguarding team, isn't it? And sort of trusting them that when they do report something, that it will be resolved. However, it's also really important that they understand that if they do have a concern, that they know where to go in that sort of whistle blowing, to make sure that they understand how to do that too. And it's not just about having blind faith. In the same way that if we feel in the social services here, we feel it's not being dealt with, we have, that we know how to escalate our concern. It's the same within a school, isn't it? It's like, yes, obviously you hopefully have trust in your DSL, but if you don't, if you're not happy, who do you speak to, and that that you'll be listened to? So it's making sure that both sides of those coins are in place there.
Yes, and it underlines, doesn't it, like even that kind of final point there, that how complex and important it is that this is got right. And teachers, I think Luke said, and I think you've both echoed it, that professional curiosity of a teacher, when even if you think, well, I reported to DSL, but I'm not happy with what happened, I just don't sense it was right, you've then got to find another avenue. And I'm sure most teachers would do that because they're sort of there for the children, but it underlines, doesn't it, that's difficult because then there's there's got to go around the system that's meant to exist. But it's important, I suppose, the fact you're kind of aware that can happen, and acknowledging that even someone in your role, that you have to sort of be on this all the time. And just because someone is the DSL, you can't then just sit back and think, well, it's all going to be happening. And I think it's almost important, feel like a sort of good point to end, to sort of underline anyone watching this, safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, which is the phrase you hear, isn't it? But it really underlines that. I am conscious of the time, but I don't know if either of you want to make a sort of final point, particularly around safeguarding, or something you want to sort of share, or a final point. I mean, Katherine, we'll stay with you maybe first.
So yes, I suppose really for me it's about having everyone's voice being heard. So in terms of safeguarding being everyone's responsibility, it's also everybody's right, and the same for that every staff member at school should feel that their voice is important and that they will be listened to if they have a concern, and including the children. So it's having that open dialogue, the non-judgmental, safe space, I think, is so important for everybody in a community. And I think that to me, if you get that right, you're going a long way towards a really robust safeguarding culture.
Yes. Yeah. No, excellent. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you. And Sue, final word to you then.
Yeah, final word. I just wanted to pick up on something that Catherine's just said in terms of the person making the disclosure. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that receiving a disclosure can be really traumatic for some staff members, and offering them the support that they might need to manage that and to cope with it afterwards. So I think that's something we should be really aware of. But again, going back to culture, I think we're looking now, I hope, to build a culture that's way above compliance. So safeguarding isn't a tick box exercise, it's a culture, it's an ethos that sits across all of our schools and across everybody. And that phrase, and we've used it again today, safeguarding is everybody's business. So safeguarding by everybody every day is really, really important.
Yeah, excellent. And I think you're right, that thing about going above compliance, maybe that's been borne out in that very first statistic we talked about, which is why these things have come up. So many more reports maybe is because of awareness, because of people being more professionally curious, because of pupils feeling more empowered to report things. And maybe actually there is a positive element in those statistics. There is more of an awareness, more of a discussion, more of a culture where safeguarding is understood now, whereas maybe 5-10 years ago it was less so. But huge topic, huge points of discussion. We could go for much longer if we needed to, but I think we'll draw a line there. Thank you so much, Sue and Katherine, for your time. Obviously Luke's left us, but thank you to him as well. I really hope you enjoyed watching this webinar, and the results from the survey I'm sure will be publicly available, so you can delve into them in more detail. But for this webinar for now, thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.